Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're here today with our great friend, Brian McLaren. If you followed any of my work, you've seen a great deal of Brian's work,
Mhm.
from book excerpts to interviews to valued contributions to my other projects. Brian's an author, speaker, activist, and public theologian. A former college English teacher and pastor, he's passionate advocate for a new kind of Christianity, just, generous, and working with people of all faiths for the common good. He's Dean of Faculty for the Center for Action and Contemplation, and a podcaster with Learning How to See. He co-hosts the Southern Lights Conference also. His newest books are Faith After Doubt, Do I Stay Christian, and Life After Doom, Wisdom and Courage for a World Falling Apart. His co-authored children's book, Corey and the Seventh Story, was released in 2023, and the first book of a new science fiction
Mhm.
trilogy, The Last Voyage, will be published in the summer. So we'll hear more about that a little bit later. But I also have to mention one of his lesser known books, which is one of my favorites, titled Why Don't They Get It? Overcoming Bias in Others and Yourself. In 2004, Brian was awarded a Doctor of Divinity from Carey Theological Seminary in Vancouver. In 2010, he received an honorary doctorate from Virginia Theological Seminary. Brian's a frequent guest on television, radio, and news media programs and a prolific speaker and networker. I can attest to that.
Mhm.
He has spoken at several of the conferences and podcasts I've produced and contributed to Buechner 101, an introduction to Frederick Buechner, and our How to Heal Our Divides book. Brian's married to Grace. They have 4 adult children and 5 grandchildren. His personal interests include wildlife and ecology, fly fishing and kayaking, music and songwriting, and literature. You can learn more about Brian's work at brianmclaren.net. So Brian, as always, it's so wonderful to see you
Hey,
again and chat with you.
always a joy to be with you, Brian.
So, is there anything else you'd like people to know about you?
No, I feel like, wow, I guess I've lived a long time. Long story there.
So, can you bring us up to date on what's the latest? What have you been up
Sure,
to the last few months?
sure. Well, I continue to work with the Center for Action and Contemplation. Um, the last couple of years, we worked hard in taking this 2-year program that the CAC had developed, Richard Rohr, Cynthia Bourgeot, and Jim Finley, called the Living School. And we wanted to update that with really good online learning support, and we condensed it into a 1-year course we call Essentials of Engaged Contemplation. And last year, we did a kind of private pilot run of this 1-year experience, and we're happy to announce that it will have its first kind of maiden public voyage starting in January of 2026, and people will begin registration in just a couple months. So that's been a big project, taken a lot of time and creative energy, and it's been an absolute delight.
Hmm.
About 500 people ran through that for the initial
Wow.
run,
Wow.
the response was so encouraging. So that's been a big project. As you mentioned, I've been working on a science fiction trilogy, and that's been so much fun. It's helped me keep my sanity just doing a creative project like this, whatever sanity I still preserve. I'm really excited about that coming out. And yeah, yeah, as you know, I have my fingers in a lot of other pies, trying to do whatever I can in these strange and challenging times.
Yes, yes. Well, speaking of which, I mentioned your book Life After Doom, which we talked
Yes.
about when that book was released. And how's that book done?
You know, we we knew that having the word doom in the title would scare some people away, but that was kind of intentional because this book was intended for people who already had a feeling we're in trouble. Already in 2025, I think a lot of people are saying, gosh, I think we're in more trouble than we realized in different ways. So, but response has been super strong.
Mm.
It's been kind of interesting, Brian, more than any of my other books. I felt a difference between older readers and younger readers.
Mm.
It's almost like somebody wrote a script for older readers. What they tend to say is, wow, those first few chapters were challenging. I'm glad I got through them. Not that they were hard to read, but hard to read in terms of difficult writing, but because it was, as you know, trying to help people face some pretty intense realities about this
Mm.
combination that people are calling the polycrisis or multi-crisis, climate change, the power of the super wealthy, uh, uh, and the lack of power for so many of the world's poor people, and the proliferation of weapons and so on. And so older people tend to say, "Wow, those first few chapters were challenging, but I'm really glad I persisted." Younger people say it was a relief, and the word relief
Mm.
comes up again and
Mm.
again because I think so many younger people have grown up with this new reality, and they just feel like it's a relief to have it taken seriously. So,
Mm.
um,
That's
so yeah,
good.
yeah,
Wow. Wow. Well, you wrote that. You probably did the writing in 2023, and it was
yeah,
released in 2024, roughly.
yes,
Now here we are in 2025 with a pretty significant change in the
yes,
U.S. administration.
yes,
And, you know, there are several aspects of that that make the whole set of issues that you described more dire
yes,
than what, you'd even originally written about it, I guess is
yeah,
one way to put it, right? I mean, how are you feeling?
yeah. Well, I mean, I'm feeling like everybody. I'm 68 years old, and I never thought I would see what's happening in our world. I mean, I should say, because I wrote this book, I did think about it. But, on an emotional level, I'm still shocked to see how fast it's happening, shocked to
Yeah.
see how easily it's progressing, shocked to see the failures of so many of our institutions to provide checks and balances as they were intended to. Um, yeah, and of course, in Life After Doom, I was talking about our ecological problem that we human beings are sucking more resources out of the earth faster than the earth can replenish them, and we're pumping out more wastes and toxins faster than the earth can detoxify them as this sort of deep critical issue that then is connected to issues of wealth inequality and oligarchy, that the ultra rich control media and often control government. And now in these last weeks, it's just accelerated to a level that if someone wrote a novel about what's happened in the last few years, nobody would have believed it was realistic. But here it is. And we have no idea what headlines will come out next week and the week after. So, yeah. But one other thing I'll say, Brian, in the book, of course, I talk about the 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 threat of collapse. Obviously, environmental collapse is catastrophic, not only for our species, but for others, and for the whole ecosystem of the earth. But the collapse of civilizations is something that, people don't like to think about, especially when they feel their civilization is working pretty well. But in the book, I describe that collapses normally don't happen all at once. It's like falling down a flight, multiple flights of stairs. You fall down a few stairs, you think, wow, that was bad. Glad that's over. And then you fall down a few more. And so what it feels like we're experiencing right now is one of those falls down a flight of stairs. And we wonder how many people will wake up and whether will be activated and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what struck me is, you talk, as you said in the book, about the combination in particular of climate change and, our inability to deal with that
Yeah.
and the resulting, political
Yeah.
implications as things get worse.
Yeah.
And what struck me about the election was this was a huge negative for both of those things,
Yes. Yes.
right? Both in terms of support for doing the right thing relative to the climate,
Yes.
and also an entire dramatic movement toward authoritarianism and fascism.
Yes. And you mentioned earlier this the short ebook that I wrote about bias. Why don't they get it? And one of the biases I talk about, I call cash bias. If your way of making cash uh, makes it uncomfortable for you to see something and face something and admit it, then very likely you'll be in denial about it because there's something in our brains that doesn't like to accept something that gets in our way of making money. And especially the way we've been programmed in this culture. And uh, and of course, the world's richest people tend to make their money through, well, over the last couple of 100 years, 150 years especially, have made their money either directly or indirectly from fossil fuels and from other things that scar and damage and impoverish the environment. So when the world's richest people gain more and more control and influence over even democratically elected officials, um, their bias is to not take seriously environmental harm.
Mhm.
And oh my goodness, yeah. And of course, you add genuine authoritarianism and fascism into it, where powerful financial interests, powerful political interests decide that they want to get rid of science and they want to get rid of free and independent journalism and they want to get rid of research into vital issues for our long-term future. And they justify it all in the name of, reducing the budget or reducing the debt or something. What you realize is we're losing things uh, day after day that took decades to build, knowledge bases, expertise bases, and and so few people, it seems, are awake to what's happening.
Yeah, yeah. It's I don't feel very positive. I think your
Yeah.
doom predictions that I felt, were a little bit too negative,
Mm.
are not. uh, in your book is what I was
Yeah.
referring.
Yeah.
So, the topic of our conversation is reading hope in trying times.
Yes.
So, what have you been reading that maybe has been helpful to get you
Yes.
through
Yes.
this kind of terribleness?
Yes. Well, if folks are interested, I have a blog post on my website where I just mention a few of the experts, and this is more in the political and economic world, that are helping me get an understanding of what's going on. And you and I have both experienced some illness, and when you have symptoms but you don't have a good diagnosis, it creates a lot of anxiety. And even if the diagnosis is not particularly, news that you would have been happy about, to have a diagnosis at least lets you know what you're dealing with and lets you know what you should be doing about it. And so one of the things that's been bringing me hope is hearing people that I think are getting deeper and broader diagnoses of what's happening. And so I mentioned some of those people, most but not all of them on Substack, because that's a place where people can get timely information out,
Yeah,
in a special
yeah.
way. It's harder and harder to do. Even though we have this amazing thing called the internet, it feels that what has happened through social media being owned by people like Elon Musk and Zuckerberg and so on, when they own social media, it makes social media become less useful, less free, less safe for getting out thoughtful information. And so that's one of the things that's been helping me. And then the other thing that has been giving me that sense of resilience and the will to keep in the struggle, that I think is at the heart of the best definition of hope, is finding people being honest enough to say, we don't know what to do yet. We're in a regrouping mode. We're
Mhm.
trying to figure out how to manage how to regulate our nervous systems. And this is especially important in this political situation because something we know about Donald Trump, not only from his first 4 years in office, but from all the years that he's been a kind of a media there's a word I don't want to use, a media hound who just loves attention, right? And he knows how to use media for his own advantage. I've noticed how many people are saying one thing we know, we don't want to give him free attention. In other words, we have to surveil him. We have to keep track of what he's doing, but we don't want to let him put us all in the mode of constant reaction, constant outrage.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what we do about that, we still aren't sure. We're figuring that out. Um, and we could talk some more about that if you'd like. But what I see in the short run that I think is wise is people are saying one thing we know, we don't want to spend the next 4 years letting him dangle a shiny object in front of us to get us to react to. We don't want him controlling us. He has so much power already. We don't want to empower him with our constant attention.
Mm-hmm. A lot of good advice. I've been finding Substack extremely helpful
Yeah.
too. The specific, people that I follow there.
Yeah.
Some of them I read every day because they've got great thoughts.
You may have already published your list of your favorite follows there, but if you haven't, I hope you will, because I'd be interested. I like to pay attention. Who are people I respect uh, following? Yeah.
Well, two that I read every single day are Heather Cox Richardson
Yes.
and Robert Hubble,
Hmm.
Hubbell.
I'll have to follow him. I'm not following him
Yeah,
yet.
you'd enjoy his work, I think. I mean, there's several others. Charlie Sykes,
Hmm.
Sykes,
Hmm.
another
Very
one.
good.
Former conservative radio host in
Wow.
Wisconsin for
Yes.
years, and more recently was part of the Bulwark,
Yes. Yes.
Bulwark, but he
Yes.
split off on his own
Hmm.
to his own separate Substack. But
Yes.
so Sykes.
Great. Those voices of people who were formerly supporters of Trump or of other kind of right wing or right leaning causes who are now sounding the alarm. I think they play a very, very important role. And I hope we'll see their numbers increasing. What tends to happen is the more extremists then throw these people off the bus and call them Republican in name only and that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's a period of time where they they have a voice that people like me don't have because I've been written off by a lot of those folks for so long.
Well, to follow on to your earlier point, there's a huge amount of distraction going on, right?
Yeah,
All the noise
yeah,
that's made about, various things, and underneath it all, the destruction of our government
yes,
and the taking over it,
yes,
by, you know, wealthy fascist forces.
yes, yes,
And boy, that's going to take a long, at some point, we'll get past this.
yes,
And somebody will try to undo that damage.
yes.
But boy, that's going to be tough.
You can destroy in 1 week what it took one
Yeah.
generation to build, and
Hmm.
and to rebuild it will not be easy. And especially, I because I was a pastor in the Washington, D.C. area, and a lot of the people in my church were government workers. I have connections in the D.C. area, and so I have to guard confidentiality here, right? But somebody who works in these fields told me recently that their fear was that Musk and his little cadre uh, are are going to destroy data. And when you realize data is a precious thing, right? People, wisdom you can get from studying patterns of behavior over many, many decades, you destroy that data and uh, it's hard to, that's a tragic loss.
Mm.
And this destruction of data or suppression of data is heartbreaking. I'll just give you a quick example from the previous Trump administration. While Obama was president, because I'm deeply, like so many people, I care so much about the environment. I really appreciated a government website that was called Surf Your Watershed. And this was a brilliant idea. They wanted to help people understand that everybody lives in a watershed. The watershed is where the water that falls on your roof of your house, what stream it goes into. And then that stream goes into a river, and that river goes into a bay or gulf or ocean. And in that way, you're connected with everyone upstream from you and downstream from you. So it was
Yeah.
called Surf Your Watershed and would help you learn about your watershed. And
Mm.
I used to give talks where I tell people you should learn your environmental address because that's where you live in God's creation, right? In connection to creation. And so it was this great thing. You'd put in your address and zip code, and it would give you access
Mm.
to all
Mm.
this information, government data that they
Mhm.
could tell you, here's the biggest source of pollution in this creek.
Mm.
Here are the
Wow.
threatened species that live downstream from you. It was this amazing access to information. And of course, it was shut down the first time around. And I actually contacted that government agency and said, look, that information is so valuable. If you were willing to give it away, I know other people who would post it. And anyhow, that's a long story
Did
that I
that
don't
happen?
know because they had hoped they would find a way to repost the
Mm.
information. And there
Mm.
is a different version of it. I don't even want to say anything about it because if somebody from those forces were listening, they might say, oh, good, let's go erase it. Right. So,
Jeez.
yeah, but
Wow.
it's tragic. It's just tragic.
Mm.
Yeah.
So besides reading, what other kinds of things, are you doing to help preserve your sanity? I
Yeah.
know you do fly fishing. I don't know if you've done any of that lately or not, but
Well, I do every chance I get. Here in Southwest Florida, I get out on my kayak and get to fish for tarpon and snook, which is a
Mhm.
lot of fun. And when I get a chance to be in the mountains and go after trout, that's one of my happy places. So, but yeah, but just the simplicity of getting out, taking a walk each morning, going out. I don't do this every single night, but many nights each week. Uh, my wife usually has fallen asleep, and before I turn off all the lights and lock the doors, I go out in the front, go out my front door and look up
Uh,
at the stars and
uh,
just keep track of, is Jupiter visible tonight? Is Venus visible? Just to sort of reconnect myself to the actual physical creation that
mm,
that is steady and consistent. And even though, we're damaging the earth so much, the earth still is giving so much sustenance and beauty. I love what Robin Wall Kimmer from Braiding Sweetgrass says. I really should memorize this quote, but she says something to this effect. Even though we've wounded the earth, she continues to give us joy. And
mm,
so receiving that joy from the earth, and I believe it's a gift from the creator, right? That sustenance and joy and inspiration. And of course, where I live, we don't have too much of a winter, and so we're already feeling like spring. But uh, around the country, spring will be coming in coming weeks and months. And and just to get out and hear that first Carolina wren of the season, I remember back when I lived in Maryland, it would be January and February where the wrens would be out there singing their boisterous songs, and every one is a gift. And so receiving those gifts, I think, is such a great thing. I'll tell
yeah.
you one other thing that's been a blessing to me is connecting with old friends who I'd lost touch with. I had
Mm.
dinner last night with someone I went to middle school and high school with, and I played in a little rock and roll band when I was a
Oh
teenager
my.
with. And he went on to become a professional musician and now is a yoga instructor. And we hadn't seen each other in decades, so
Wow.
he happened to be uh, visiting in the area. And so we had dinner. So just gifts like that, joys of
Yeah.
life.
Very
Yeah.
cool. Very cool. Well, I want everybody to hear a little bit more about the new book coming
Yeah.
out this summer. That's a departure from, the types of things you've written before, so it's pretty exciting.
It is. I wrote a trilogy, sort of fictional trilogy, 2001 to 2004 or 2005 called The first was called A New Kind of Christian, and the second was
Yeah.
The Story You Find Ourselves In, and the third was The Last Word and the Word After That. So that had been fiction, but it was very sort of heavy on some theological work too, right? Um, uh, this one is science fiction, and it's got a lot of nerdy stuff in it for people who like science. But it also, and it's set in the first book is set in the 2050s,
Mm,
and it envisions a world that continues on its current trajectory,
mm,
and uh, and there are a couple of philanthropists, billionaires who decided they didn't want to be oligarchs. And
mm,
so they became philanthropists and they ended up starting a colony on Mars.
mm,
And the question is, will Mars keep repeating the same
mm.
problems that we have here? So that's sort of the fictional setting
Wow.
for it. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. And then, of course, I have to ask you, what do you have coming up next in terms of speaking engagements or, other things going on you want to tell folks about?
Well, so much. Yeah, I mean, folks can always go on my website, brianmclaren.net, under events and see where I'm going to be for the rest of the year. I've got a full travel schedule this year. I'm actually not planning to travel for public speaking next year. So I'm taking a year. I
Wow.
turned 70. I'm just going to kind of regroup and catch my breath and figure out where the best ways are for me to spend my time
Mm,
for that next decade. So this will be kind of one of the, I'll have very few public appearances in 2026. So those, I'm looking forward to these events coming up this year. And yeah, some of them are already kind of sold out, but there's
mm.
still quite a
Wow.
few where there's plenty of opportunity.
Well, Brian, it's always so impressive to, hear all that you're doing. And, I know there's a lot of us that follow all of that, closely and so appreciate all of your work. So big thank you for all of that.
And that goes right back to you, Brian. Thanks for all the good that you're doing through your many channels. And I think each of us, we know we can't do it all, but we try to figure out what are we gifted and skilled and uh, placed to do. And we try to do what we can. And we're grateful for every single person who's listening, who's learning what's theirs to do as well.
And grateful for every single day that we can still do
Exactly right. Amen.
it.
Amen.
All right. Well, thanks again, Brian, and best wishes.
Thank you.